We'll get started with the Fast Five. Our first question, what's your name?
Bruce Shanks,
And Bruce, what's your farm's name?
Sassafras Valley Ranch.
And where are you located?
I'm located in the Ozark Hills in a little town called Bell, Missouri.
Okay. Where is Bell relative to like Springfield?
Be about 2 hours and 15 minutes up the interstate from Springfield, right between Rolla and Jefferson City.
On I-44?
Yeah, about 20 miles off I-44. Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, we farm in Osage and Marys County here, so.
Oh, yeah. We've got a Osage County in Oklahoma,
Correct.
not too far
Yeah,
from me.
and Kansas. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, not surprising, huh?
That's right.
What livestock species do you graze?
We've got 300 registered South Pole cattle. That's kind of our centerpiece. Those would be owned and partnership cows. And then we also have today about 150 commercial Katahdin ewes. Goats in the past, but right now we're out of the goat business. So.
Oh, yeah. And what year did you start grazing animals?
Well, we bought this farm and in Bell, let's say in 2003, so a little over 20 years now on this place, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, the podcast dedicated to sharing the stories of grass-based livestock producers and exploring regenerative practices that improve the land, animals, and our lives. I'm your host, Gal Hardage, and each week we'll dive into the journeys, challenges, and successes of producers like you, learning from their experiences and inspiring each other to grow and graze better. Whether you're a seasoned grazer or just getting started, this is the place for you.
Are you ready to turn market data into your competitive edge? Introducing the newest course from Noble Research Institute, Market Smart Ranching. Learn how to evaluate the true worth of your livestock and assets, break down costs, and time buying and selling decisions like a pro. It's all about making smart, market-driven moves that put you ahead. Join Noble for Market Smart Ranching, October 14th and 15th in McKinney, Texas. Scholarship and grant opportunities are available for those who qualify. Visit noble.org and select Find a Course to learn more about Market Smart Ranching or enroll today, because smart decisions can lead to a stronger ranch. For 10 seconds about the farm, I have grown a great crop of weeds this year. Some of our pastures look great, but others, I've done really good with the weeds. In fact, I'm thinking I will mow some of them, and that is not something I want to do. I don't think it's a effective use of my time, nor of money, but I think I'm going to mow them just to try and cut down on some of the seed production. For 10 seconds about the podcast, I am going to the South Pole Field Day and auction this weekend, so Friday and Saturday, in Perryville, Arkansas. So if you're in the area, I encourage you to go. Great speakers. You can see some great cattle. And then if you get bored, come say hi to me. So I look forward to seeing you there. Also, later in this episode, we talk about Greg Judy, and we talk about one of his books. And I said the name of the book wrong. The name of the book is How to Think Like a Grazer. In the conversation, I believe I said How to Think Like a Rancher. No, it's How to Think Like a Grazer. I just want to clarify that. And with that, let's get back to Bruce. Did you grow up wanting to be in agriculture?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely always wanted to have a farm, and I grew up on a small livestock farm. I wanted to be a veterinarian, which a lot of folks, young folks, want to do that. And got into college and didn't get through the chemistry very well, and so I switched gears a little bit. But yeah, my passion was always to farm. You know, quite frankly, I wasn't ever sure that I'd be able to do it full time like I do now. And so I feel like I'm extremely fortunate, and I'm really blessed to be able to do that. Obviously it was a while coming. I've only been about 5 years now where I've actually not had an off-farm job. But yes, that's always.
Yeah.
My wife says that's all I want to talk about. That's all I want to do. And so, yeah, my life pretty well revolves around the livestock business. So,
I went to OSU, and biochemistry was 7:30. As I recall, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I don't know. 7:30 is too early to be in class. And I wouldn't say that fully caused me to change a little bit of direction on my major, but it did contribute.
yeah, certainly. I also worked job shadowed a vet one day, and he goes, "What do you want? What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, be a vet." And he said, "No, I mean, what do you want to do after that?" I said, "Well, I want to, I'd like to have cattle or whatever." And he said, last thing you're going to want to do after working on somebody else's cattle all day is work on your own." And that struck me, pretty hard at the time. And that probably influenced me to switch gears a little bit as much as the chemistry. So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So
That's a pretty profound statement there.
it is.
And it's something to think about. Yeah, if you're doing it all day, I know, and I've talked about on the podcast, I worked off the farm for a number of years, and I was in technology. And I cannot stand doing tech support. Now, my parents ask me to do tech support quite often, and they're like the only people that get away with it. I come home, I don't want to do tech support. Of course,
Right.
that's been a few years. I've got way too much technology.
That makes sense.
Way it goes. So what prompted you to move to the Bell area?
So this will take a little bit of a longer story. So I met my wife in college in Springfield, and so we're both natives of Missouri. This is home. But I did pursue a master's degree at Montana State University. I think the romance of the West is pretty strong in a young Missouri kid that loves cattle, and so that was a great experience. And from there, I actually went on and worked on a PhD in animal science / meat science at South Dakota State. So we made a big circle, and from there, my wife got a teaching job in Bell, actually, and so that brought us to this area. Neither one of us are, originally from here, other parts of Missouri. My wife about 40 miles from here, though. And anyway, I was farming with my in-laws, and we thought we'd find a rent house in between, and we couldn't find one. So we ended up renting a little house here in Bell for a few months, really loved the community, and ended up buying a farm here, and here we are. So a little bit of an accident. It really started with my wife getting a teaching job, and we just never left. So
It's amazing how those little occurrences, accidents happen in life, and they fully shape where you...
yeah, that my whole story is nothing but just a chain of those type of things. That's exactly right. So
You mentioned there you bought some land in Bell.
Yep.
Before we really talk about your journey with that, let's talk about what are you looking at in types of land there in that area. You mentioned the Ozark Plateau earlier.
Sure, yeah, this is mostly cattle country, and so about half of the ground around here will be wooded ground that's too steep or too rough to be pasture, and then most of the rest of it would be pasture. We do have some crop ground along creeks or something like that, but that's fairly limited in this area. And so it's going to be mostly thin soils, pretty rocky. One of the farms we lease is actually a rock quarry, and I like to take people down there, and it gives you a real idea of just what's under our feet once they strip what little topsoil we've got off. So, but, predominantly fescue country, and going to be a mixture of pasture and woods and, of course, some hay ground. But, a fairly tough country. It's made for cattle and, and sheep and grazing and that sort of thing. So.
Where I'm located, I'm just west of the Ozark Plateau. It extends just a little ways in Oklahoma, and I'm west of it. Our creeks, the closest lake to me is Uga Lake, and it's just not a pretty lake. But you go to, because the water is just dirty, just because we have runoff of soil, the Verdigris River is just a muddy river. But you go east, and you hit that Ozark Plateau, you start getting there. All the water's so clear and pristine. All those rocks are doing a wonderful job of filtering.
Yep. And we do have that here. I mean, there's springs in the area and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's very much the type of country we operate in. So.
Oh, yeah. So you get down there, and you like the community Bell, and you all decide to buy a farm there.
That's right.
What was kind of I know you'd mentioned you'd always loved cattle. So the goal was, hey, I've always loved cattle. Let's buy a farm. Let's run some cattle.
Yeah, it was. That's really my passion. However, I've had sheep and goats since I was a kid, managed the sheep unit at Montana State, raised sheep at South Dakota when we lived there. And so we had some brush and weeds. And so it was pretty natural that we get in the small ruminant business. Also, my son, we wanted to give him kind of a place to start. And so we got in the sheep and goat business first, but followed quickly with sheep. Actually, quite soon, basically about the same time we got some commercial cattle. So, there again, that's something that was a fairly easy thing for us just because we'd been around it and that curve wasn't maybe quite so steep. So
let's talk about the small ruminants first before we get into the cattle. So you had experience managing the sheep flock. Well, you'd grown up and you'd had sheep and goats. You managed the sheep flock in Montana.
Yep.
Was that wool sheep at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, it was just wool sheep, even in Missouri, basically. And goats were kind of mostly, when I was a kid, it was a dairy cross or maybe a Spanish, and they were just kind of a byproduct of brush control. There was some Angoras in Missouri at a time there. And I remember took a sheep and goat production class at Missouri State University, and we spent, as we should have, we probably spent 5 minutes talking about hair sheep. It wasn't relevant. That would have been in, say, 1995 or something. And, of course, now, it had wool sheep at Montana, wool sheep at South Dakota. But now, obviously, the bulk of the sheep in this state, including my own flock, are hair sheep, and for a good reason. So,
when I was finishing up my degree at OSU, I needed an elective. I'm trying to find an elective fit my schedule. And I knew the professor that taught sheep production. So I took sheep production. Actually, one of my friends and we both worked on the OSU dairy. We both planned to go home and dairy, but we thought we'll take a sheep production class. So get that elective out of the way. Very interesting, and it all sounded really good. Of course, back then you had wool sheep, you had that wool incentive program. I don't know what it was called, but there were some other factors in there. Yeah, hair sheep, I don't even remember even talking about them.
Yeah, no, we were just introduced to the idea. That was it. Yeah.
So when you got sheep there in Bell, did you go initially for hair sheep?
Yeah, so we actually started with goats first. We had mostly brush that we were trying to deal with, and so we started with goats, mostly just sale barn goats. My son and I would we had a stock rack on a pickup, and we'd go to evening and weekend sales, and we'd buy a few, and then for the most part, we'd cull and bring about half of them back the next time. And then we got just a few hair sheep just to get started, and eventually progressed almost to all hair sheep. And even today, like I'd said, we actually sold our goats last fall, and now we're strictly hair sheep. So, yeah.
Somewhere along your journey with goats, you got into the Kiko goats.
We did. We did what you're not supposed to do. We basically bought culls out of the sale barn, and there again ended up culling most of those that lived anyway. And so eventually progressed and started using more of Kiko genetics, a little bit of Spanish genetics, and did that for several years. And they kind of ate themselves out of a good home on our place. And so we got out of the goat business momentarily, and then we bought another farm that had some brush and we thought, well, we'll get back into goat business. And we did. And we kind of thought we'd expand pretty big again and do a lot of, fencing infrastructure to support that. And we ended up, getting some more land. And we kind of came to a crossroads last fall where we either needed to get out of the goat business or we needed to get, grow. And we decided to step back. And I've done that a few times, but we'll see if I get back in it again. But they're not for everyone. And as you know, they come with a set of challenges sometimes, but.
They do. I had boar goats, then I had Kikos for a number of years. Sold them, kind of felt like they'd worked themselves out of the job. I got some lease land, and now I've got just enough goats to give me a headache.
Yeah.
And I love the goats. I love what they do. I would love to expand the numbers. I don't want to put up more netting. I don't want to put up more fencing for them. Really, as I think about the future with goats, for me, I'm waiting on virtual collars to be cheap enough that it just pencils out for goats.
It would certainly solve one of the obstacles, that's for sure. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it would. It might introduce some others because you still got to worry about dogs and stuff. But
right, parasites, but at least you'd
yeah,
maybe solve the fencing issue. So
yeah, and that fancy one's big with goats.
yeah.
And also a little bit with sheep. But so you decide on Katahdin and hair sheep. Any particular reason you went with those, or was that what was available in your area?
Yeah, I think by that time we were kind of thinking along the lines that we needed we wanted an animal that would kind of take care of themselves. And so the hardiness factor, the good mothering ability, that sort of thing kind of led us to the breed. And we've dabbled a little bit other directions, but for the most part, we've had a closed flock of those for about 20 years now, really. And certainly, there again, the cattle are our centerpiece, but we very much appreciate the complementarity aspects of the sheep flock. And, we just got done selling some lambs. That helps us out on some cash flow. And,
yeah.
We enjoy a little diversity with the sheep for sure. Yeah. So,
with your sheep, when are you aiming to have them lamb or marketing for them?
Sure. So we lamb in April, right out on pasture, and we get the sheep up once a year. We do that this year about the 1st of August. We go through all the ewes, checking eyes, feet, and teeth and udders, and we get rid of them if they've got issues. We wean all the lambs except for the ewe lambs that we're going to keep. They just stay on the ewe. And they don't see the little corral we've got again for another year. And so real simple deal there. We market our ewe lambs right off the farm. Most of those are going to go to our cattle customers. And we've enjoyed, that's been a pretty easy market for us. And a handful of rams the same way, but mostly the ewe lambs. And then the ram lambs, we'll do a couple of different things with them. We've never quite solved this. Sometimes we'll just sell them. Sometimes we'll graze them a little bit. That hasn't ever worked out that well. It confuses the dogs and everything. And sometimes we put them in a barn and feed them. And that's what we're doing right now as we speak. I've got a set of lambs that are on a self-feeder in a barn, and they'll be in there another 30 to 60 days. We'll run them as heavy as we think we can get away with and try to get this market a little later into the fall, although it's pretty good right now. And we'll probably market those through a sale barn. That's typically what we do. We're blessed with a couple of sales not so far from us that have been really good to work with. So that's kind of how we run the sheep.
On the self-feeder, is it a full feed self-feeder?
It is. It's a pellet that we make it actually has alfalfa pellet ground up and as a component of the pellet. We do put them we put a round bale in there as well. But for the most part, they're self-regulated on that bulk feeder, and it works pretty good. On a year where feed's relatively cheap, and we thought that lamb market will continue to get better, we thought we don't do it every year. We thought we'd try it again this year. So, and the guy that helps me, he's got sheep too. So we've got his sheep on feed, my sheep on feed, and we used to buy some lambs too, and we didn't do that this year, but. There's been times we'll just kind of keep playing with that and feed a few, but that's a whole nother ball game. So,
well, I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to dive into
Sure.
that just a little bit. And the reason I say that, we've got hair sheep, and that's always my dilemma on, we wean them, we wean those ram
right.
lambs. Then we got to do something with them.
You do. That's right.
And I try and just grow them on pasture.
Right.
But I'd love to get a little bit more weight on them. But also I'm trying to hold them long enough for that market to get better.
Yep.
And they just cause more problems because
Right.
they're intact. I don't want them getting to the ewes. They mess up my lambing season. And my lambing season for next year is all messed up. I'll try
Sure.
and solve it next year.
Yeah. But those ram lambs being around, that definitely adds to it. Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I certainly don't have the answer either, but that dilemma, I think, is what a lot of us face, when we're lambing, when we do, and weaning. The main reason we wean, we got to get those ram lambs out of there. We're going to start breeding ewes and lambing in the winter. And so
Right.
I don't know that, this putting them in a barn and feeding them is necessarily always the right solution. It does solve some issues. We have tried to put them back out on pasture, and we've got a couple of real issues. They're trying to get back in with the ewes, is just what we're trying to prevent. Two, our guard dogs are so confused. We're trying to keep them spaced apart from
Right.
the ewes. And now we've got an extra group to manage. And quite frankly, the buyers, they want them a little fleshier than what the pasture is going to provide for them. And right now we're dry. I'm glad we don't have them on pasture right now. We'd be in trouble with them. And so the trouble with putting them on feed like we do, especially a self-feeder, is it's hard to hold them back because they're getting fat on me already. And
Right,
so
yeah.
typically we're marketing them a little bit earlier than I want. Sometimes I think the folks that are set up to maybe do a little bit of feeding in a dry lot or on pasture, maybe a little bit more of a balance than what I'm doing, they might be able to drag them a little later yet still get them fat. But yeah, there again, my mentality's low input and graze them, but I think sometimes we got to keep our options open, and this is just kind of a tool in our toolbox that we employ occasionally. And last year, 2 years ago, we'd have been a lot better off just sold them right off the ewe. I think we lost, we probably cost ourselves some money feeding them. Last year we did really well feeding them. That was figuring our expense and kind of what we thought they were worth on the front end. And we'll see what this year. We'll see what this year looks like. The health has been good so far, and that's really the driver. You start losing a few, then you should have sold them, I guess. But
Right, yeah. We've had, last 2 years, we've lambed about half the flock or a third of the flock in February, which I know is not what you should be doing. But I really like it, if weather cooperates.
correct, yeah,
Because then I can wean them directly off the ewe in May and take them to the sale barn.
yeah.
And I feel like those are doing better for us than when we lamb later in tax day. April 15th, we start lambing. I feel like those early lambs serve us better than the others that we end up trying to hold till, I always try and go to the first of the year, but that's not always how long I can take them.
Correct. Yeah, that's what we'd like to do too. But with putting them on feed, we'll never make it that far. They'll get way too big on us. But it's actually it's a pretty good dilemma. Lambing outside in good weather doesn't necessarily match the best market on the other end. And
Right.
I've got some buddies that lamb quite a bit later to try to help that, but then they fight some parasites and tall grass, and that has its challenges too. But hopefully you'll get it all figured out, and you can let me know what we should be doing. So
Yeah, there we go. One of us will get it figured out.
there you go.
The other thing you mentioned, you bring in some feeder lambs sometimes. My dad and I talked about that, but I'm a little apprehensive about doing it because I don't want to bring in a lot of parasites, cause a bigger problem for myself.
Yeah, we're pretty aware of that too, and we do it in the confines of a building on concrete, and that way, and we'll actually take and we'll go through the trouble of taking and spreading that manure on a different farm that doesn't even have sheep or goats on it, and so that's definitely a challenge, and we haven't seen the opportunity of feeding in the last handful of years. This lambs have gotten they're pretty high, and kid goats, and so to me the risk has been a little bit tough. But when we could buy them, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago was probably the last time we bought in some feeder lambs and feeder kids, and when the market was a little bit softer and we thought we could add some value to them. And so I think we'd still consider doing that, but I think the stars got to align a little bit right. That's not our main deal, but we're always trying to find a way to make an extra buck if we can. So
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's kind of our thing. Could we make some money doing this?
Yeah.
What's the trade-offs?
What's the trade-offs? That's right. So
the other thing you talked about, focusing on Katahdin genetics for the most part, pretty close flock. Have you considered some of the, you might say, the hair carcass breeds, as Dorper or something along that line to improve your carcass size, or do you not need it at all?
We consider it, but we don't want to trade off that toughness and parasite resistance. And not that there's not probably individuals in those breeds that would work, but I'd have to be really sure of that. And then second of all, we just talked about one of the challenges is for me to drag those things later into the year.
Yeah.
And so for me to make them bigger earlier, it might work against me a little bit. And so the market that we're selling into wants a 55 to 70 pound lamb. And so my little ewes are, more than capable of doing that. In fact, with the way we're feeding this group now, we'll have to watch or we'll get them too big. We may even go to Iowa. We can sell into a couple of sale barns in Iowa that won't pick on us so bad if we get them up in that 80 or 90 pound range. We may just keep on feeding along and get them a little heavier than we should, but we'll have to go a little different place with them, I think. So
yeah, because I don't want the average being above 70.
No, not typically. We'll have to market them different if we do that. That's right.
Now, I did run a Dorper ram on my ewes last year, and I thought that really made that early set of lambs really nice because they came off the ewes heavier.
Oh, yeah, where you were needing to kind of push them a little bit in that case to meet your market. Yeah, I can see that.
We are keeping some ewes out of that, and we'll see how that goes because I'm very concerned about what they're going to do to parasite resistance.
Sure.
How they're going to handle it.
And that would be my concern too. But I don't like to ever say never in this business because, I don't like to, I like to keep all my options open. And so, I like to have a full toolbox. So we'll see what happens in the future. But right now, that's the direction we're going on the sheep. So.
And when you were running sheep and goats and then also cattle, was that 3 different herds you were managing?
The sheep and goats, we always ran those together.
Oh, did you run them together?
Yeah, up until we bought this other farm, and then we did split the goats off just because they were in a better, that was just a better spot for them. So, and we haven't talked about this much, but we're spread out. We lease several farms, and so our home farm is where sheep and the goats were, at least for several years before we moved the goats to another farm. Our home farm is, set up for sheep and goats, sheep now, and kind of what I call transient cattle, herd bulls, weaned calves, maybe a group of cows that graze through, bulls were developing, something like that. And so we're kind of in and out with our cattle. We don't have a resident herd, if you will. That may change. We just bought a farm that joins us, and I think we're going to start calving our heifers on that place and probably just run them together with the sheep at least most of the year. And so where I'm going with all that is it's kind of been an in and out. Sheep and goats were together, and now the sheep. Sometimes cattle were with them, sometimes they weren't. Sometimes cattle were in front, sometimes behind. We may evolve a little bit, I think, into a little bit more of back to a group where cows and sheep are actually together. We like that because we get rid of a group. But yeah, our home deal is not always normal because it becomes the resting grounds for everything else that's going on all the other places. Like right now, we've got some cattle getting ready to go to a sale. They're there. Well, they leave Thursday. So, I mean, it's in and out. Yeah, a little bit in and out there. So,
with the sheep and leased land, have you ran any sheep on leased land?
We haven't, but I am tempted. I do think it's pretty easy running cattle on leased land because
it is. Yeah,
I sleep all right doing that at night. And I mentioned we leased this rock quarry farm, and I've often looked at it and thought, oh man, what a place for sheep or goats. I mean, it is made for it. It's very steep and rocky, and there's plenty of weeds and brush. And it's pretty close to home, and I've never pulled the trigger and ran sheep or goats on lease ground. The only thing I've done is put goats on another farm we owned that wasn't, that was down the road.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know. The sheep, sometimes I feel like they need looking after every day. Like when I left to come up here and do this, my wife was just going out to feed the dogs and move the sheep. And, that's the other thing is, dealing with our guard animals. And so anyway, haven't done that, but I respect those that do. And I think it might be some low hanging fruit in my operation. So
I think it's very interesting, but I have some of the same concerns.
Yeah.
I do have one lease property that butts up against Dad's place, and I do put sheep and goats on it. But the other properties, I just think about all the bad things that could happen.
Yeah, I know I need to. It would be great. But
it would. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm nervous about it, I guess. So.
At Redmond, we know that you thrive when your animals do. That's why it's essential to fill the gaps in your herd's nutrition with the minerals that they need. Made by nature, Our ancient mineral salt and conditioner clay are the catalyst in optimizing the nutrients your animals get from their forage. Unaltered and unrefined, our minerals have the natural balance and proportion that your animals prefer. This gives your herd the ability to naturally regulate their mineral consumption as they graze. Our minerals won't just help you improve the health of your animals, but will also help you naturally build soil fertility so you can grow more nutrient-dense pasture year after year. Nourish your animals, your soil, and your life with Redmond. Learn more at redmondagriculture.com. So let's jump back to, early 2000s, Bell Farm, and when you decide to get cattle on there. What was your thought pattern? What did you go with? Did you go use the sale barn as to source some beginning animals? Or did you already have some?
Sure. Yeah. And I may back up to, a moment, and we talked about that earlier, these moments in life and that probably put me on this path. And there again, this is a little bit of a long story. But when I was at South Dakota, this was a big day for me, a really big day for me. There again, I went through the university system. I grew up wanting livestock, and, I'd taken classes and been around cattle and worked at, I worked on cattle farms all through college. And anyway, I take a group of students that I'm supposed to lead them down to Nebraska, to the Sandhills, which I love that country. That is great cattle country. I fell in love with it that day. Went through there last week and went right by this place, by the way, that I'm going to tell you about last week. And I went to the Rex Ranch, among others, but this was a large commercial operation owned by the Church of Latter-day Saints, and at that time managed by Burke Teichert. And so I go to this, I go to the outfit. I haven't been there before. And, I'm thinking that they're going to tell us all about how great their cattle are, and they're going to brag about weaning weights and this and that. And instead, I heard grazing management, and I heard run this like a business, and labor efficiencies, and moderate cattle, and not too much milk, and not too much size. And I thought, wait, whoa. This is the opposite of what I, kind of had in my head up until that time. And, I just can't say enough about what a wake-up call that very day was for me. And I reflect back on that day often as I go about my work year. And so, that day really stuck with me. Run things like a business. They talked about, low inputs, and they ran this little moderate size red composite cattle, and they're again just kind of breaking the mold on everything. So a couple of years goes by, and I have pretty well taken their philosophy, and I decide I'm going to implement it on this farm we just bought. And so we're going to make the cattle work for a living, and we're going to make them graze. That was my introduction to grazing management, and I went to every conference, and that became my favorite subject overnight. It really did. And anyway, so I tried to implement the principles of what he was talking about, but I just bought some cattle, just some sale barn cattle. Basically, they were maybe a little better than sale barn, but I didn't have access. I didn't think at the time anyway to cattle. But so we start down this path of what I'll call low input, making the cattle graze and making them work for me. The things that Burke was talking about that hit me so hard. And that didn't work with those cattle. My preg rates were dismal. I mean, they'd raise a big enough calf and then they'd want to take a year off. And so that did not work. I was managing a large commercial herd at the time. That was my day job. And I was trying to implement some of the same practices there. And that worked well because the owners were adamant that they start spending less money. And so fit perfect with what I was trying to do, except there again, it wasn't even really fair to the cattle to ask them to perform in what I was creating as a whole different environment. So obviously that led me to to the breed that we have today, and that's kind of a story in itself. I don't know if you want to hear that now or not, but I'll be glad to share.
We can go ahead and hear that, how you got on that path.
Yeah, so So we're following this model that we think makes sense. Let's try to make some money in this business, and got the wrong genetics. And I was sitting there eating lunch at the place where I was managing in the other side of the county, and taking a break. Picked up the Stockman Grass Farmer because there again, I was pretty enamored with all things grazing and still am. And, that's obviously been one of our keys to success. And so I picked this magazine up. I see this ad for South Pole cattle, never heard of them. And what really caught my eye was it was a 573 area code, which was the same phone number as, the same area code as mine. I thought, well,
yes.
Why I did this, never know. I dialed the number, and Mr. Ralph Voss answers the phone, answered right away. And I'm sure it was not a very intelligent conversation on my part, but something to the effect, "What's a South Pole?" And anyway, he told me, and I thought, golly, maybe this is something that I could use to fit what I'm trying to accomplish. And just as as luck would have it, and thankfully I must be a lucky person because that's how I stumble through life, I guess. But Ralph said, "Hey, you should come. There's a field day right here in Lynn, which is my county seat. I mean, this is 20 miles from my house. Just a random call." And you should come. Teddy Gentry's going to be here talking about the breed, and we'll go look at the cattle. And there again, as I hung up the phone, typically, you don't follow up on things like that. But I did.
Right.
I went. And so here's Teddy telling me about this breed that completely matches, and he's saying the same language. He's talking the same game that Burke and his managers were talking, that I'd heard 2 or 3 years. And I thought, oh, man, okay, this is the missing piece. This is what they were doing with those little red composite cows, and now Teddy's telling me he's got one that's made for my area. And we went and looked at the cows at Ralph's, and I think one of the things that struck me, and I've talked to you about this before, but there was a bunch of FFA kids at this event, and I remember I guess it was the fall of the year, because they had their blue corduroy jackets on, and they come streaming over the hill, and Ralph had these South Pole cows all kind of hemmed up in a corner just with a single wire, just so they were easy to look at. I thought, they're going to cross the river. They'll never stop running. They're going to spook.
Right.
I mean, this is going to be a disaster. And they just stood there. And so not only had I just heard about some genetics that maybe would help me in my mission, but here's this gentle breed of cattle that I've never seen. And so I was obviously, I was pretty struck. And I went home, told my wife, I said, I found what we need. And my son and I went to Alabama within 2 weeks, and we bought our first set of cattle. And we haven't looked back. So that's what put us in the breed. We stumbled into it. But the fact of the matter is we needed an answer genetically, and the South Pole provided that answer to us. And that was, 18 years ago. And here we are today. So.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't my first time to hear about South Poles. I heard about South Poles a long time ago, and I'd even talked to someone about them, and they sent me some pictures and stuff. Pictures are really hard to get a grasp on a quality of an animal and how it is. So when I revisited South Pole, I learned about the field day. So we're going to go to field day. I believe it was in Tennessee that year.
Yep, probably.
But the year before, it was just like 40 minutes from my house. But they weren't on my radar at that point.
That was the year. That was COVID. Yeah, we backed it up and had it in Oklahoma in the fall. Yes, sir. Yep.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, man. So went to Tennessee. And one of the things that just stood out to me was you got polywire with a few animals per break. And people are walking everywhere.
Correct.
And it doesn't bother these animals at all. And I grew up on dairy, and dairy cattle are pretty calm. They're big and calm. They're not a problem. We had beef cattle. They were not as calm, but we were working that way to get them calmer.
Sure.
But they were not as docile as these animals with complete strangers. And that was my first impulse, my first reaction, my first impression of them was just how docile they were.
Well, it's the same with me when those kids came over the hill that time. It was definitely an eye opener as well. It's a nice bonus, is what I like to think. Yeah. So
yeah, because docility is great, but it doesn't pay a lot of bills.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So as you dug into this and you said in just a couple of weeks you all purchased some Southpaws. Did you start with heifers? Did you buy some cows? Did you start and cross them
Sure.
with your herd?
Yeah, we did buy a bull, but we were able to buy some bred heifers and some pairs. Yeah,
Oh,
pairs.
yes.
Yeah, they were actually had little baby calves on them, and so thankfully back then, not everybody knew about Southpaws. They were a little easier to come by, and so we bought in pretty hard, and then obviously have grown from there.
So outside of their calmness, what impresses you about the Southpaws?
Yeah, and so there again, I get I owe all the credit to Burke to kind of get me started down this path. But we really pride ourselves on a real simple recipe to cattle production here, and so because of that reason, I need something that can take care of themselves, and so we're able to run those Southpaws on our fescue hills with no supplementation, and so they're certainly easy keeping. They're big gutted cattle.
Oh, yeah.
They're moderate. They don't milk too much. They don't they don't perform that they don't wean off bigger calves than they need to. That they fit my environment. They're slick and can handle the heat, which is important to me because we're going to calve in April and May, and so we've got those bulls out working in the summertime, and so we really appreciate that about them. And we got heat tolerance built in. We've got fescue adaptability, and we've got this this easy keeping type of phenotype and moderation of milk and so forth. And so to me they do more on less than anything we've been around. And they're again just a great fit for our I can't impress upon you just how simple our operation is. It is it is nothing special. We just like to keep things very simple. Those cows are going to go through the chute one time a year. We're going to preg check them, sell the opens, and the rest of them get to keep marching on, really. And no supplementation and no annual vaccines, no wormer, and just raise us a calf and do your job, and you get to stay for another year kind of deal. So pretty simple.
And are you calving those heifers at 2 years of age?
We do. We absolutely calve our heifers at 2 years of age. That's not always easy, and we'll have some fallout. We preg checked early yesterday to kind of get an idea. We'll have to come back and re-preg in 30 days just to kind of catch the tail end, but we needed to preg check some heifers for a sale. And so, we'll have 20-25% of those heifers that won't breed to calve as 2, and we'll move them on down the road. And, it's a kind of it's sometimes a tough pill to swallow that day, but then the next day I go, okay, well, we just found the top end. That's okay. We try to make lemonade out of lemons on open cows, and we don't hang our head on that too much. We just know we're improving the herd. So
we were very much a limousine-based herd for years, but we got into a problem. We were having terrible breed up on our heifers, not getting them to calve at 2 years of age. And we were pushing them. We were full feeding them. We were pushing them to get there, and we were still having problems, which led us to start looking at some other breeds and incorporate some other breeds in there and get to the Southpaw. So those numbers, you'd love for those numbers to be better, but we've fed heifers and had worse numbers, which is just is a dagger.
Yeah, and I think we could take a little better care of them, and we probably could get those numbers higher. But we try to put some pressure on them and kind of let the cream rise to the top. And
Right.
Mother Nature's helps us out every day, trying to make our herd better. So we don't want to ignore her. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So with you mentioned you're not using any vaccines, any dewormers on them, no chemicals.
I should be clear on that. We vaccinate our calves, but we don't annually vaccinate our herd bulls or our cows, and so they kind of get
so not the cow herd, but the calves are
right. We vaccinate the calves and kind of take care of them on that. And now, as far as deworming, we just deworm steers, and that's it. Nothing else. Yeah. And if there would be one that would need that, they're probably going to fall out, and they're going to show up as open. That's kind of what we find is we lay off the supplements and we lay off the chemicals. We'll have some fallout and they'll show up as open. And, we're kind of calling that fertility, but it's due to some other factors, but we find them that way one way or the other. So.
Right. And, that's very much Lassiter's philosophy.
Correct.
You may sell some good ones, but you got rid of all the bad ones.
Right, right. And we're a seed
Basically.
stock producer, and so we want to try to be harder on our cattle than the next guy down the road, and that way, they can feel good about what they're getting. And if they want to deworm or vaccinate or supplement, well, at least they'll respond to that.
Oh, right.
So,
Yeah. So being a seed stock producer, do you sell a lot of heifers off or females off your farm? Do you sell a lot of bulls off your farm?
yeah, we do. We market, the bulk of the females that we're not retaining ourselves, we'll sell off the farm or through a handful of sales. And then the bulls will mostly be private treaty. We sell about 50 bulls a year. We've got a couple of cooperators we work with too. And so, we're going to steer most everything. We're pretty hard on them, but the top end bulls, yes, we're going to market, one at a time up to 10 or whatever it takes. And those things will get scattered. Oh, I don't know. Last year, I think we sold bulls from Florida to Vermont, and trying to think how far north,
How far west and north?
Certainly Nebraska and Iowa last year in kind of a circle, so they
Oh,
get
yeah.
scattered out, maybe about 30 states or so. And the same way with the heifers that we sell. Usually sell weaned heifers these days. There's enough of a market. We'll sell a few bred heifers and some sales, but we'll move a lot of those weaned heifers early, and because we got to
Oh,
keep,
yeah.
we'll have some bulls around. And then the steers, those will go to grass finishers. We've done that since the very beginning. We don't finish anything, but we'll sell those to grass finishers. We like to keep those steers a little and own them a little longer, especially the light end, to use those as our drought mitigation, and, sell them the next summer when, or later if we've got grass. But quite frankly, the last 3 or 4 years, our falls have been so tough that
Oh,
we've been
they have.
forced to sell them shortly after weaning, and we are definitely looking at doing that again this fall. We're terribly dry. So the steers we'd like to own them longer, but it's going to take some better falls before we're going to do that, I think. So,
In our area, our falls have been really bad for a
Yeah.
number of years. But actually this year, now we could use rain right now because, 2 weeks we're dry. But we've got a lot of submoisture because we've had a lot of rain throughout. We went, I don't know, last of July, early August, we got pretty dry, but I don't think we ever even hit that abnormally dry this year.
yeah, we
I
certainly
just
are.
need it to continue.
Yeah, we're in a pretty tough spot right now. We're really dry, but those steers, feeder calves, are worth quite a bit of money right now, and so we're not
Yeah.
we're not too bothered with letting those go. Probably in December or something, and we'll see if we have a better year in the future, and we might hold those over, especially the light ones anyway, and run them till
Oh, yeah.
we'd run them till June or October even the next year. That's our game plan, but it just hadn't happened lately. So.
Yeah, you've got to have the grass to do that.
Yeah, but we do like to let the steers be our safety valve on the drought. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
With you mentioned December. Is that when you're weaning your calves?
Okay, so yeah. Once again, don't get locked into anything. We calve in April and May, and I typically wean in mid-November, right before deer season. We like to deer hunt, and so
Oh, yes.
so that's a little bit, in the grazing circle, that's maybe a little bit early. I would call that more traditional type weaning. A lot of my friends
Right,
would
yeah.
leave those on the cow much longer, but I have very specific reasons for why we wean when we do. First of all, it really gives those cows a nutritional break, and so we can winter them a lot tougher. Second of all, we can move dry cows a lot easier. We've got some farms sitting empty right now that we don't want to haul pairs to. We don't have the facilities there, so we'll haul dry cows there. We'll winter them there. They can
Oh,
eat,
yeah.
really coarse grass, and then go on hay when we run out of grass. And without that cow nursing, they'll get along fine. The other reason I do it is it allows me to sell a calf on this side or the other side of the first of the year, and that's just
Oh,
really
yeah.
a tax mitigation thing. But that's a pretty powerful tool for me occasionally. And some years it's a difference between making some money and not. And so now, I said we normally wean in mid-November. We are in such a tight spot this year that we are strongly considering moving weaning up about 45 days. That's a profound thing that I've not done before, but we're already looking at feeding hay. And so we're thinking we can give those cows a break, get them to some of those other farms, get them on hay. So we're still toying with that. We ain't quite got that all figured out. But normally we wean in mid-November. We're thinking about moving it up here, maybe even as quick as 2 or 3 weeks from now. So
Yeah, you immediately take down those nutritional requirements for those
Correct.
cows.
yeah,
Like you said, you've got some farms you can get them on. You can get them on
Right.
some rougher ground.
right.
Yeah, there's some benefits there that you can play with that
Right.
weaning date
That's right.
to get what you need.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I don't ever like to get backed in a corner. I like to keep my options open. And you won't hardly ever hear me say I'd never do that because things change and sometimes you will. So,
Well, our problem is we can't even remember what we did last year. How did we do that last year? Well, we do it this way this year.
sometimes that's a good thing.
With your bulls and you're weaning them, and how long are you developing them and how do you develop them?
Okay, so we do something a little unusual there. We sell a lot of our bulls. I would say half or better of our bulls will be sold when they are still nursing the cow.
Oh, okay.
Now there's some good and bad to that. The person that picks that animal out gets to see mom right there in her working
Right.
clothes, and I think that's a powerful thing,
That
and they
is.
appreciate that. And then, but they're buying, they're purchasing or putting their name on, let's say, a pretty young calf. And so what we turn around and do is we'll stand behind that animal. It needs to turn out as expected. If something
Right.
happens and it keels over dead, that's on us. So, I mean, we take away that risk, if you will. And so then we get them weaned, and then one of two things will happen, at least on those early sold bulls. They'll either go to their new home as early as December. They get to be now finish developing on that person's operation and get used to their environment.
Oh, yeah.
B, they can, save a little bit of money because I'm not going to charge them a grazing fee for the winter. And so, or we'll keep them until they want them. We just got rid of a bull the other day that had been purchased over a year ago, and we just maintain them here. And so, I like to say that we'll do whatever the customer wants anywhere from December to, the following year. We'll graze those bulls. It's just grazing them. We don't do anything special for them. But there again, even those bulls that leave here in December, so that would be an 8 or 9 month old bull. We'll still stand behind those bulls, and we occasionally have to buy one back. I'm buying one back right now as we speak. Just a bull just didn't turn out. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe it was their fault. Doesn't matter. We stand behind them, and so that's a little bit unusual. I'm not sure I would recommend that to anybody. I don't know how that ever started. It's like one time somebody asked me, hey, can I come look early? And then pretty soon people just kept coming earlier and earlier. And so we've kind of developed that. I've threatened to just stop doing that, hold them all and sell them, at more of a typical yearling or 18-month-old or something. And we'll certainly sell some older bulls. We'll have some that'll, go through weaning and yearling and so forth and still be around here. But kind of a weird backdoor approach to, we've kind of started selling bulls that way several years ago, and we just kind of kept doing it. And I think I had a guy pick a bull out this year on probably the 1st of July. So that bull would have been 75 days old. But he looks great still. I think the guy's, he's getting him in December, and so far so good. And, he's tickled. He got to see mom and, kind of got to see the calf when he was small and progressing and so forth. So there you go.
Well, I like the idea of being able to see mom, especially in her working clothes out there, because most of us are not buying a South Pole bull as a terminal sire.
Correct.
So you're trying to get those maternal genetics in there. So
That's
I really like the model.
Yeah.
We've also bought bulls in the past that didn't turn out, so I do get that part too.
Yeah, and I think, we have to, if we're going to continue to work off of that model, then we'll just continue to stand behind them. And there again, sometimes, whatever things happen, if somebody takes one home and doesn't feed it, that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. But hey, I'm in the bull selling business, and that's just part of it. So, but yeah, there's no secrets. I mean, you get to see my management, the cows, everything is just right there in black and white. And it's odd, but it's not when you really stop and think about it. probably makes more sense than seeing that bull as a yearling or 18-month-old coming out of a feedlot and you don't know what's happened, prior to that. You just know they look great today, but, so.
Yeah, we bought a bull, I'm going to say off a neighbor, 10 miles away, no guy. He says, yeah, we'll sell him at market price. And he's got really good cattle, not really the model we're after. He's more of a traditional model, but a little bit of moderate size. And we go up and look at his bulls, and my mom's cousin was wanting a bull, and he really liked the other one. I was like, great, because I like the little bit shorter, got a nice deep body. So we bought him because he sold him at market price to us since we knew him, and we thought, well, we can't lose at that. The worst, we take him market. He's turned out really good, and I was really scared about him just because this guy's got some bigger Angus. And so we have an Angus bull in here we're using on Dad's cows, and he has really, I'm really happy with him. Nice, deep, moderate size Angus bull that didn't fall apart when the grain got taken away from him.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And
not always the case.
It isn't. But we had a deal there. We thought we'd be fine either way. We'd gamble on it. And I've been really impressed with him. We'll see how his calves go. Of course, he's the wrong color for what I'm trying to do, but he fits what my dad wants to do.
Yeah, I understand.
With your selling your seed stock, I'm sure you come across a lot of people just getting started in Southpaws. What do you tell them if they come to you and they're interested in Southpaws?
Yeah, we do. I deal with anything from homesteaders to beginning farmers, Amish producers, all the way up to, well, of course, other seed stock producers, and then also, commercial cattlemen, both small and really large, several thousand cows. And so, I think the message is still pretty similar across those kind of diverse customers, if you will. They're for the most part, they're going to all still be interested in some similarities. And, like you said, they're looking to produce females. And so that's our bread and butter. And so they're looking for a bull, or females, I guess, that will go on but ultimately something that'll produce those, red, moderate, easy keeping females that, that will fit their program. Now, some of my commercial guys will say we want to really moderate size. But then some of my smaller guys and homesteaders, they already are saying we just want to keep them smaller or moderate. And so that's kind of universal. Disposition is a pretty big deal across all of those. I mean, obviously I'll run into a few, folks along the way that don't mind to be cowboy but for the most part they appreciate, and so we talk about disposition and birth weight too. That's pretty universally important. And so, but, when I get a new person, we just kind of talk a little bit about, well, even anybody, we talk about our program, and and of course, right along with that's, our cattle and our genetics. But, I think ultimately they're buying a program as much as they are buying cattle. And so we try to be an open book about that. And there again, I mentioned we try to do things, we follow a real simple recipe. So it doesn't take me very long to walk through our program. No supplement, no extra stuff and no crutches. And if you're open, you go. And I don't cloud it much more than that. So, that's usually what I share with them. But I've never liked to try to sell something or push something on somebody by taking something else down. I love this business, and I love all cattle and all cattle folks. And so, Southpaw's not for everybody, and everybody's not for a Southpaw. And so, I think oftentimes when we try to be everything, that's when somebody starts talking about, well, I really, I'm really interested in weaning weight. And well, okay, then, maybe it's probably not the way to increase weaning weight. Yeah, well, it'll be acceptable. And so we're, if we need to, we'll steer them in a different direction and not afraid to do that. And because otherwise, hopefully we want people that are involved in the breed for a long time. And ultimately, if they're not, happy with that first experience, they're not going to be in it anyway. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, just on our use of Southpaws, I'm sold on them. I just don't have any money. So, work with what I have.
Sure.
Using a Southpaw bull, but we used them on my dad's herds. So my dad's got his herd and I've got my herd. And we share bulls. And we were using the South Pole on there. We're not going to use South Pole bull on his herd. Now he's got a fall calving herd, so this winter when we breed them, because his paradigm is that weaning weight.
Sure.
And I am encouraging him to look beyond weaning weight into some other factors, but he's not there yet. So I said, we're not breeding with the South Poles on your herd this year. We've got this Angus bull. We may want to pick up another one and see how it goes. See if he's happier with those calves, because that paradigm, I mean, that's been his paradigm for decades, and it's hard for him to move. He has moved a long ways, but it's still hard.
And we definitely run into that. Sometimes I have, traditional commercial guys that'll call me and they've read something or whatever, and they say they think, you know what, our cows are getting too big. We need to do something different. Well, then they come and they're pretty hyped up about the idea, and then they come and and they look at these small bulls, or especially if they're young. I usually go try and show them a mature herd bull. That helps, but and sometimes they just say we just can't do it. It's just too big of a. And oftentimes what we find is, well, maybe a good place to start is use those bulls on some heifers. And that's where that's where we get cracked in with some of our commercial guys, is they'll start out and use them on heifers. And, that's a good place to start. And, and then they can kind of go from there and decide, they're not for everybody. And,
right.
This business is, what's great about the cattle business. It's made up by a bunch of independents, and we, by and large, we do what we think works best for our operations, and we're not under some contract with anybody telling us what to do. And I have total respect for that. So,
Bruce, I've got a couple of questions that may be more of a hot seat variety, so we can see if you want to answer them.
Sure.
Is there a big concern or a big difference when we're looking at purebred versus full blood?
No, not according to me. Unfortunately, anytime you use two different terms, it's kind of like choice and good. It sort of implies that one must be better than the other, and that's not the case. And we do hear those. I hear those terms thrown around the South Pole breed quite a bit, but I just try to encourage people. I would try to make good culling decisions, put some pressure on the cattle, and use whatever genetics are going to improve your herd. And if that's a full blood or a purebred or a percentage or some other breed as far as that goes, then do the wise thing. And I'm obviously in the registered business, and so we're always transferring papers, and I'm encouraging people to register, and I'm on the board of the breed, and obviously that's important to help us keep promoting the breed. But we all know we can't eat those papers, and so they're only as good as the cattle that come with them, and that's true with the whole purebred full blood thing. So we pay zero attention to that. We try to follow our little simple recipe and keep our head down. So,
well, good cattle are good cattle no matter what you call them.
That's right.
The next question, within the South Poles, you have a lot of solid red cattle. You also have a lot of mottled face or a little white on the underneath. Does that white on them bother you at all, or is there a concern about that? Should you be going solid?
Yeah.
And I hate to say, I'm trying to keep my bias out of it, because I do have a bias in this.
Sure.
And I'm trying not to word my question with my bias I have.
No, that's okay. I'm actually really glad you asked that one. I'll tell you my recipe again. No supplementation, no extra crutches, chemicals, and we preg check, and if you're open, you go home, and we treat heifers like cows. And not once in there did I mention full blood or purebred, and I sure didn't mention color either. And so, I absolutely pay no attention to it. Now, I'll have some customers that'll want an all red bull. I'll have some customers that'll want a white face bull. I'll have some that don't care. But we've got, whatever X number of mottle faced or white faced cows, and same way with the bulls. And I'm not gonna mess my program up by wading off in the weeds after something like that. That is not gonna have any impact on my end game at all. So I'm pretty adamant about that. So,
do you find when you're talking to commercial producers that maybe they should go solid, or just because you're worried about that deduction at the sale barn, or is it like, don't worry about that?
It really depends. And some people, especially on the bulls, you'll get a person that says, well, we're only going to own one bull, and so we can afford to be pretty choosy, and maybe that's choosy that they wanted solid red, or it might be choosy that they wanted to have a little character, as I call it, and have a little bit of white. And so, they're and maybe they can afford to be driven that way when they're making a bull purchase. And I'd hate to see them buy a lesser bull from me based on color, but so yeah, we run into that a little bit. But I mean, if you if you got somebody that's had Herefords in their background somewhere, they'll want a white face. And so I don't see much. I do see discrimination one way or the other, but it's not consistent. It's sometimes one way or the other. And the fact of the matter is they don't really breed true in terms of color anyway. So you can have two red ones and you'll get a white-faced calf. And so I'm not sure sometimes that chasing that it's not going to really work out for you completely anyway. But so, yeah, I don't know. It's a discussion point usually when I'm dealing with folks, but sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't. So it sure doesn't to me, though.
Yeah. Well, very good. Before we switch to famous 4 questions, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think, well, yeah, a little bit. First of all, hopefully I've made a case that, we have a real simple recipe here, and South Poles are certainly an integral part of that. But I'm also, and I've kind of muddled through life and really hit some lucky points and some aha moments, if you will, that's kind of changed the course of my direction. And so, but I'm also blessed with, my wife is very supportive, and she's, I just mentioned earlier, she's moving sheep and feeding the dogs and probably getting supper ready while I'm working on this. And my son and daughter-in-law, they help out. We were gone for a week vacation. We don't do that very often last week, and they helped out with chores. And then we've got a full-time guy that helps us too. And George is, we couldn't do what we do without him. And so, with this business, it helps to be surrounded by people that help you get your job done. And we're blessed that way. And I'll extend that a little further too. We run cattle for other folks, and they're very much our partners in this game, and we appreciate them. And we have a lot of lease ground, and I consider those folks my partners as well. And so we wouldn't be here doing this without my wife and family and our good help and our landlords and our cow owners. So just kind of a shout out to them. So thanks for letting me do that. So,
Bruce, it's time for our famous 4 questions.
Yes,
Same
sir.
4 questions we ask of all of our guests. The South Pole Grass Cattle Association invites you to the 17th annual South Pole Field Day and Cattle Auction, happening September 19th and 20th, 2025 at Heifer Ranch in Perryville, Arkansas. This flagship gathering brings together breeders, enthusiasts, and industry professionals to celebrate the South Pole breed while deepening knowledge of grazing systems and animal husbandry. This event features educational talks on the history of the South Pole breed, heifer development on forage, and breakout sessions on grazing tools, record keeping, and producing premium grass-fed beef. You'll also enjoy the junior speaking contest, networking opportunities, visiting with vendors, and plenty more. Founded in 2008, the SPGCA is a nonprofit dedicated to advancing this gentle, heat-tolerant maternal breed known for exceptional grass-to-beef efficiency. They provide pedigree, registrations, education, and events that connect and support producers nationwide. Join us for 2 days of learning, sharing, and community. Register or learn more at southpole.com. That is southpole.com, SOUTHPOLL.com. Our first question, what's your favorite grazing grass-related book or resource?
So I've mentioned how I've had these little wake-up calls in life, and when my favorite book, just because it's had such a meaningful impact on me, is Greg Judy's first book. And that book, if you go back and read that, he talks a lot about running leased cows on leased land, and that was really important. That helped us grow from a one farm, one set of cows into, whatever, leasing 10 farms, owning 3 farms, and running a lot more cows. And so Greg's been a big influence on me, and so I'll pick his book. His first book is my greatest resource. Had a big impact on me. So
Oh, very good. Excellent resource. And since you brought up a Greg Judy book, his third book, How to Think Like a Rancher, first person that emails me, they would like that book, I'll put it in the mail to them. For our second question, what's your favorite tool for the farm?
I'm going to say my UTV. I bet I started that thing 50 times today alone, and I'm always in it back and forth, and we've got a couple of them. We use it for calving. We use it for fencing. We pack firewood, salt, mineral, and, it's what carries us around, and I'd be in trouble without those things, so we use them every day.
What's your brand of choice for your UTV?
We've got a Kawasaki Pro FX. We like it because it's got a big bed and a big seat, and we use it a lot. But then we use a Polaris Ranger a lot. We got one of those too, and we like it for calving because it's a little bit smaller and more nimble. So, yeah, I've tried different ones. Those are kind of the two we use today. So,
Oh, very good. Our third question, what would you tell someone just getting started?
and I've kind of alluded to a little bit of this today, but, I think, well, 2 things. One, walk before you run a little bit. I love excitement, and people get, I'm going to graze cattle, and then I'm going to get me some pigs, and then I'm going to chickens, and, and so, I think people, young folks and beginning people need to kind of slow down and master one thing before you move on to the next. And I love diversity, but you can get too many things juggled in the air. And I think second of all is I don't think I'd get yourself boxed into a corner. And, I think we need to be an open mind is what puts you in this business. And so don't go getting enclosed now. And, and I think it's easy to look back at some traditional folks and think, well, I'll never do that again. But don't ever say never because, a drought or some event can force you to change your mind. And so I like to tell them, keep that toolbox full and don't throw out any of them tools just yet.
Yeah.
So
I think that's excellent advice, yeah. Bruce, where can others find out more about you?
we have a website, Sassafras Valley Ranch. You can look us up there. My cell phone number is listed on the website. I don't mind to give it out, 573-578-3945. My email's on there as well, and also on Facebook. And, don't hesitate to call me or get a hold of me any way you need to, whether obviously if you're wanting to buy a bull or a heifer or whatever, but if you just want to talk about something, I try to always make time for everybody and, share some of my experiences, and I'll probably learn more than they did just visiting with them. So,
And then the South Pole Field Days coming up Friday and Saturday.
Yep.
You'll have animals in it?
I will. Got my catalog right here, and it's September 19th and 20th. We consigned a couple of heifers. I'll be leaving in a couple of days and headed down to Arkansas. So this is our 17th annual, and this is my 17th one I've been to. So I haven't missed one yet.
Yes.
Yep. I've made them all. So.
Oh, excellent.
Yep.
Before we wrap up for today, do you have a question for me, Bruce?
Yeah, you said you've got some South Poles too, or been using South Pole bulls?
Yes.
Yeah. What were you crossing those with?
For my herd, they're mainly South Poles or Corrientes.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Corrientes are cheap. They
Yep.
fit my pocketbook really well. I really like that cross. I've had some half Corrientes, half South Poles calving now, and I'm really liking them. Sometimes, I started bringing this up earlier, at weaning, even at a year of age, I'm like, I just don't know. But at 2 years old, I'm pretty impressed with those heifers.
Yeah, they go through a little awkward stage. Yeah, we sell a fair number of bulls that go over the top of some, Corrientes or Texas Longhorns or whatever.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I've always appreciated those crosses. In fact, I had some Longhorns myself for a while, and we sold those in a drought a couple years ago. But anyway, so, yep, nothing wrong with that cross. So.
Yeah, I think it works out really good. And then you get that half South Pole, half Corriente, and you cross it against the South Pole. That calf looks solid beef.
That's right.
Not to take anything away from the Corrientes,
Correct.
but that hardiness is built in there, but you've got some beef factors in there, and it's better carcass.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that direction. So.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, I appreciate you coming back on. We didn't mention this earlier in the episode, but we recorded one episode, and was a disaster. It wouldn't upload.
Hey, the only thing better,
The episode was great. It was probably the best episode ever.
yeah, I'm sure it was. Well, the only thing better than visiting with you once is visiting with you twice. So yeah, I'm deeply appreciated that you asked me to be on here, and humbled to get to do this with you. So if I can ever be of assistance, you just let me know. So
I appreciate it. And I appreciate talking to you. Appreciate you coming on. I'll see you in a few days.
yeah, you gonna be at the field day?
I will be.
Oh, awesome! I'll see you there.
Yeah. I love that Bruce really leans into a simple recipe for cattle production. He's getting his cows in once a year. He's not doing a lot of added things to them. He's using forage. I think it goes back to make your cows work for you. Don't work for your cows. And I think that's excellent advice. And I really enjoyed this conversation with Bruce. And as I mentioned earlier, we had the opportunity to record it twice because the first one would not upload, but the second one worked out great and we got it out. I hope you enjoyed it. I would ask that you share it with someone who would enjoy it. Just share it with one person. It'll really help me. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Grazing Grass Podcast, where we bring you stories and insights into grass-based livestock production. If you're new here, we've got something just for you. Our new listener resource guide is packed with everything you need to get started on your listening journey with the Grazing Grass Podcast. It gives you more information about the podcast, about myself, and next steps. You can grab your free copy at grazinggrass.com/guide. Don't miss out. And hey, do you have a grazing story to share? We're always looking for passionate producers to feature on the show. Whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, your story matters. Head over to grazinggrass.com/guest to learn more and apply to be a guest. We'd love to share your journey with our growing community of grazers. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.